I'm going to respond to the questions that were asked by this brother and sister who were here this morning. It has to do with the presentation that I did on body, soul, and spirit. Now the question is, I have a question. There are two questions actually, but let me read the first one. I have a question based on what you shared today. Bearing in mind that the soul is the meeting point between the body and the spirit, and that our actions reveal the condition of our soul, and under demonstrational salvation, you did mention something about a renewed soul in a Christian's life. Is it possible that a born again is prone to not demonstrate born again attributes? If yes or no, how or why that might be the case? All right, so to rephrase what our brother is asking, what he's saying is, how is it that you can be born again? You have a renewed spirit. Is it possible that this renewed spirit might not put you in the direction of righteousness, and you might need to have your soul renewed before, can it be that your soul and your spirit are in contention, even though you're born again? And it might seem that the answer is yes, but let me explain. First of all, we need to focus on the issue of what do we obtain from a person's spirit? What does our spirit give us? Now, the best way I can explain it is to use Jesus as the example. Now, again, I'm going to go to the question. When Jesus came from heaven to earth, what made him different from any other human being? Nobody needs to answer, but I would like everybody to consider the question. Jesus came from heaven to earth, and what he left behind his personality, he left behind his glory, he left behind his body, he left behind his character, he left behind his power. What made him different from you and me? And the only difference I can see when I search the Bible and when I consider the whole plan of salvation, the only difference I can see is that Jesus, his nature was good. His nature inclined him to do good. This is the only difference I see between Jesus and any other human being. Okay, so the good spirit is what made Jesus a divine person, because God alone is good. So Jesus was God because he was good. Even when he was a fetus in Mary's bosom, he was divine. He was God by nature because he was good. And that was the only difference. If anybody can identify any other difference, I would like to hear it.
I have one, David. I'm sorry to interrupt. It has to do with this exactly what you're talking about. And the way I can understand what you was sharing a while ago is this. So Jesus gave up. The way I understand it is like this: Jesus gave up his life, his understanding of where he was at in heaven, his position, his powers, everything, to come here to earth and start a new life, not knowing anything. And that new life that he started in humanity as a human being, as a perfect, is what we are debating today or we are learning today. Am I correct? I mean, this is what I get to you from what I've learned from you so far.
Um, it's not really what we are discussing, but we are using Jesus as the key element to understand what we are discussing, because we are really discussing human nature. But Jesus is the perfect example that helps us to understand. That's
Okay,
why I'm focused.
okay. So let me rephrase it. Let me rephrase it because yes, you did understand what I'm saying. It's just that I didn't say it right. So he gave up his life. He everything that he knows. He starts a new one down here, and here he creates a new one. Isn't it the same, pretty much of what we're saying here? We're learning here.
Yes, and the point I'm making is that because we can see that the only thing that Jesus brought with him was goodness. The only difference was goodness. There's nothing else. The only difference was a nature that leaned to goodness. So therefore, when Jesus was born and he was a baby, he did not behave like other babies. And it was not because he was intelligent or he was educated. It was because of the nature that was in him. So as he grew up and he began to be educated, his mother gave him a good education, but his education was controlled or was directed by the good nature that he possessed. Now, you and I, we're born with a bad nature. We're born with selfish natures. That's the difference. And so as we begin to be educated, one of the things that I notice is that my little grandson is not 2 years old yet. And I don't mind. He's always grabbing my arm for me to see what he's doing. He wants to be praised. Okay? My older grandson, no difference. When he does something really well, he says, "Are you surprised that I did that, Grandpa? Are you surprised?" He wants to be praised. And, I understand motivation is good. I suppose in me there's still a little of that nature that I like praise, okay? But I understand that the heart, the spirit of a human being is self-centered. The spirit of God is naturally other-centered. And so the question is, when we are born again, what happens? The nature of the spirit is changed. A Christian's spirit is no longer self-oriented. He starts to think about other people. I can tell you that I use myself as an example because I'm the only person that I know whose experience I know so well. But I can tell you, when I became a Christian, before I became a Christian, I said something to my brother one day, my eldest brother. I don't know if he remembers I said something to him that was really nasty. And I thought it was okay. All right, I called him a name. And he was so upset, he went and reported it to my father. I was a grown young man, and so was he. So my father just reprimanded me. But then I was so upset, I said, "I'm just joking with this guy, and he's going to report it to daddy." And I was upset for a while. And years afterwards, when I became a Christian, I remembered what I said to my brother. And I thought, I must have been out of my head. How could I say something like that to my brother and think there's no offense in it? I mean, my mind and my nature were so changed that I just could not fathom how I could ever say such words and not think that a person would be offended. And so the point I'm making is that your spirit changes. However, now that you have a new spirit, do you know everything? No. You are still going to do things that are not perfect in God's ways of doing things. Why? Because even though you have a good spirit, you are ignorant about how to behave, how to exercise that good spirit. Sometimes you'll find somebody come on here and say, "Brothers and sisters, we need to be more active in sharing the gospel." Didn't you want to do that the moment you became a Christian? You did. But now somebody comes and educates you as to a way in which you can direct that impulse. And so now that you're educated, you are living the Christian life more perfectly. Somebody will say to you, "Do you know that if your enemy is suffering, you should go and feed him?" You say, "I never thought of that. I never thought of that. I thought I should just avoid him." Because even though you no longer have that anger and hatred of your enemy, your education teaches you, just avoid him. Christianity comes and teaches you, no, you can feed him. You can go and do something nice for him. So your soul is being brought into line with your spirit. So your spirit is changed, but your soul still needs to be educated. And that is why, as Christians, we are continually seeking to educate and develop ourselves, because we already have the desire, we already have the new heart, we already have the new spirit, but the soul needs to be educated that we might develop in our personality and our character in ways in harmony with that spirit that we have. So, in response to our brother's question, a born again person may not demonstrate all the qualities of Christianity because of ignorance. And because sometimes he doesn't know how to subdue the bodily impulses. The bodily impulses might seek to override the spiritual impulses. And that is why he needs to be educated. He needs to be taught. He needs to be nurtured. He needs to be supported by other Christians so that in the process of growing, what he desires and what he longs for and what his spirit is saying, he might find ways how to express those in life practically. All right, so I hope that this brother can understand this. And then the second question is from his wife. She says, what happens to the soul when our spirit is governed by the Spirit of Christ? And that's kind of similar question, and it has a similar answer. But then the next part says, can Satan still have control over our soul if one possesses the Spirit of Christ? If no, then please clarify what you stated when you said that Satan can control the soul but can never take over the spirit. Is this only over people who have not been born again? And the answer is an absolute unqualified yes. Now, I know that there are people who teach all kinds of things, but I'm going to tell you, I insist, Satan cannot possess a Christian. No Christian can be demon possessed. And anywhere I see that teaching, I'm going to object to it very strongly. Christ and Satan does not inhabit the same space. In the Bible, it tells you, Jesus told you the story about a man who had demons cast out of him. And Jesus says, when the unclean spirit is gone out of a man, he goes through dry places seeking rest, and he finds none. But Ariel, let me mute you because you're getting a little feedback. He goes through dry places seeking rest, and he finds none. And then he goes and gets 7 spirits more wicked than himself, and he goes back to that place. And he finds the house swept out and garnished and clean. But what? Nobody is living there. The house is empty. And he goes in and takes possession. Nobody is living there. And that means that Christ is not in that person. If Christ is there, not 1, not 2, not 7 demons can't go and live in a person when Christ is there. This is absolute nonsense. Christ and Satan does not dwell in the same space. Yes, Christians can be harassed by Satan. All right? Christians can be harassed by Satan. Satan tempts Christians. Satan persecutes Christians. Satan finds a way of creating stumbling blocks in the way of Christians. But to take up residence in the temple of the living God, look, the man of sin can sit in the temple because he can come into the Christian church and sit down. But that is because the Christian church is not controlled by Christ. The Christian church, by and large, has long ago driven away the Spirit of Christ. But when your body is the temple of the living God and you have allowed Christ to come in and live, what road, what door does Satan come through to come to live inside of a Christian? No, absolutely not. When I talked about somebody being possessed in the soul but not in the spirit, I mean non-Christians. I'm not talking about Christians. Non-Christians can have an evil spirit taking over the soul. That is, it takes over the mind and it takes over the body. And it speaks with a person's voice. And the person might be inside wanting to be free. Okay, the spirit of that person still, it's subdued. Your spirit is not controlling that body. It's the evil spirit controlling your soul and your body. And so when Jesus comes and sets you free, your spirit is liberated again, and you can choose whether you want Christ at this point. But until then, the evil spirit is in control. But this is not true. I'm not talking about Christians at all.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Brother Ray, and then Sister Tina.
Yes. So my understanding now is, because I'm growing in the understanding. So my heart desires are within my soul. In other words, your soul is where your heart, where your desires are at. So what changes in us, what Christ changes in us and takes away, is those desires that Satan puts in our soul. Once that's cleansed out, and we're free from these evil desires, whether it is to worship something or do whatever. This is the part of us that's coming back to life at the resurrection, and this is who we are. Am I correct?
Okay, let me use an illustration to answer your question, Brother Raymond. I know you will understand this because I know all of us here are involved with phones and computers. Okay, now I compare a person's spirit to the operating system. You have a body, which is the software, which is the hardware. Okay, you have a screen, you have a computer case, you have a phone. Without an operating system, you have a vegetable. It cannot function. Okay, you put an operating system on it, it is ready to receive data, but the operating system by itself is just the capacity to function. It doesn't start to function yet. You start installing software, and when you start installing software, now you are beginning to take in what we call data. Data is what I compare to the soul.
Okay.
The operating system is your spirit. Now remember, you have an operating system like you have Windows, or you have Apple, or you have an Android or an iPhone. They don't work with the same software because there's a different philosophy behind how each thing works. Right? The philosophy of Apple is different from Android. You might have a Bible software on Android, you have a Bible software on iPhone, they work similarly, but you cannot take the Android one and put on the iPhone because the operating system will not accept it. In a similar way, not the same way, but in a similar way, the spirit of a Christian is different from the spirit of a non-Christian. It's two different operating systems. Now, you take the software, which is information, which is character, which is experiences, and you begin to develop a character. So your computer or your phone takes on a character based on the software you put on it. Now, suppose your phone is destroyed, your body is gone. How do you bring back that phone? Well, first of all, if you have the first thing you try to do is try to recover the data. The data is the character, the data is the soul. But the spirit is the operating system is necessary because the data needs to be put back with the operating system. So what God does in the resurrection, he keeps the spirit and he stores the soul, if I may put it that way. I think that's the way he records the soul. He records the soul because the soul is based on data. Now, just let me say something before you, Brother Ray. Right now, there are some people who are trying to become immortal by uploading their brains to the cloud, right? They are planning to do it. They think that because they can take their data, they can read the brain and they can access the memories, and they are thinking if we can find out perfectly how to get all this data, if you can get David's information and you store it in the cloud, when I am dead 800 years later, they can take that data and restore it and I come back to life. Why is this not true? Because what they will have is data. They won't have David. Because what is David? I am not my data. I am my spirit. My spirit is the key to my identity. The data plus the spirit produces a soul. So what you see, the information is important because if I just have my spirit, when I'm resurrected, nobody is going to know me. There's no data to go with it. There's no smile you can recognize. There's no information you can recognize. You don't even recognize the voice. All you have is a spirit without data. But God records my data because the Bible says everything is written in quote unquote in God's book. There is data stored, but my spirit is not data. My spirit is me. But me plus the data produces the soul that is David. So both things are to be restored in the resurrection. God will bring back my spirit from where he keeps it, and he will restore the data that he has kept. Of course, he's going to delete the bad parts, right? He's going to delete the bad parts out of the data, and he's going to put back the good data. And lo and behold, it is me minus the bad information.
Interesting, David. God bless you. You know why? Because what you just explained now was exactly what was in my mind to ask you. Because I was gonna, I was gonna say, well, in the computer world, they send this data up in the cloud somewhere,
Well, praise the Lord.
for the memory. The same thing you were saying, but in my heart, I was thinking, that our data, it gets sent. It gets sent. I mean, I'm just saying.
All right.
It goes into the cloud of God's hands. In other words, his data. His data is very special. It's a different cloud than the one that we're talking about physically.
Right.
So I
All
was
right.
gonna ask you that question. Say, David, could it be possible that it means that our data, our soul is sent to a cloud in his hands, his cloud, which is
Yes.
very different than the clouds that we use, manually, mankind. Uh, I mean, it's amazing. Thank you.
All right. So the main point is that the spirit is to be resurrected, but the data is also to be restored. The two parts are to come together because one without the other. If God just brings back the data and not the spirit, what I will have is a clone. I'll have a robot acting like David. It won't be me because data is just information. Me is the spirit. So it's the data plus me that brings back the complete soul. All right, Sister Tina, you wanted to say something?
Yes, good evening, everyone. I just have a quick question. When Christ was born, he was born with the spirit of his father, and like his soul was brand new again, so he had to be retrained. When Adam was created, pretty much the same. My question is, what went wrong there? Seeing that he too was, I know he sinned, I'm just kind of wondering about the mechanics.
The Adam is a case that we have to kind of read between the lines and draw our own conclusions because Adam clearly was not created as a baby. He was created an adult man. So God didn't just create a blank slate. God put data in Adam. He was born with data. Let me put it that way. Okay. And it's kind of reasonable because a baby is born without teeth. Adam was born with 32, right? A baby is born with a small body. Adam was born with a full grown body. So Adam was born fully mature. It was created fully mature. And so God gave him data. God made him able to interact with his environment. He didn't just go out there and had to learn like a little baby how to walk and how to understand what he was seeing. God put information in him. So God not only created him with information, but God also began to teach him certain things because God told him, don't eat from the tree or you will die. So that's the best way I can explain Adam's situation. Now Jesus could not come like this. Why? Because Jesus had to become a part of Adam's race. He could not be created as a separate entity. There had to be a way to include him in my family because he was coming to save me. So he had to come under my environment and under my situation. So he had to become one of us. So the only way was for him to be born and to grow up. There was no other way.
David, can I say something?
All right, Brother Ray, but I'm going to ask you to be quick because
Yeah, I'll
yeah,
be real quick. I'll be real quick. So, looking at what we're talking about, the data and the clouds and whatnot, um, Adam, when he was created, he had all the information already input in him. And the disadvantage that Jesus had was he had no data input in him.
but what he had absolutely over Adam was that he was good by nature, and Adam was good by by this by borrowing the Spirit of God, by the Spirit of God being in him. If the Spirit of God left Adam, he was no longer good. But when the Spirit of God left Christ on Calvary, he was still good. He had something that enabled him to be the savior of humanity. That was the key.